When Silksong released, there was this funny shift in the community. Before, people typically weren't sympathetic towards the Pale King. In fact, he was generally seen as a very, very bad guy. I mean, when one dumps their tens of thousands of children into the abyss, it makes sense that they wouldn't be very well-liked. But when Silksong came out, and people discovered the story of Farloom and Grandmother Silk, suddenly people were saying that the Pale King wasn't so bad. Suddenly, he had a lot more defenders, if you could even call it that, or just people who sympathized with him more. What caused this shift in the community? It's all thanks to how absolutely terrible Grandmother Silk is. People saw what went down in Hallownest and went, wow, that's really messed up. And then we saw the absolute carnage and devastation in Farloom and went, oh no. But jokes aside, there are some fascinating parallels and foils between the Pale King and Grandmother Silk. In this video, I want to dive into their characters, their stories, and really examine how they're similar and how they are completely opposite. I also want to examine some narrative themes in Hollow Knight and Silksong that nicely contrast or fit in together. So grab a snack, get cozy, and let's dive into the worlds of Hallownest and Farloom and the fates that claimed them both. While I'm not going to recite all of the lore about the Pale King and Grandmother Silk, I do want to take a brief look at their characters individually before I start comparing them and the themes in this game. So let's start with the man, the myth, the baby killer himself, the Pale King. Let's get the basics out of the way. The Pale King is a higher being, the equivalent of gods in this game, but he's also a pale being, which is supposedly greater in divinity and power than that of other higher beings like the Radiants or Un. After shedding his worm form, the Pale King decided to create the first and only eternal city with him as its king. Then the Radiants, fueled by rage for being forgotten by the bugs who used to worship her, infected all of the citizens, turning them into mindless zombies. In an attempt to save his crumbling kingdom, the Pale King sacrificed his children until one became a vessel, an empty being. But turns out that vessel wasn't actually all that empty. The Radiance began to leak back out, the kingdom fell to ruin, the Pale King died, and la-di-da-di-da, the Hollow Knight game plays out. Y'all know how it goes. If you've seen my video on the buzzsaws of the White Palace, you'll know my deeper thoughts about this guy, but I'll briefly reiterate them here. The Pale King, in my eyes, was never a cruel character. Flawed, yes, very flawed, and he certainly committed horrible crimes, but he wasn't cruel, nor was he evil. We know he was in a loving relationship with the White Lady, which tells us he was capable of caring. We know he wasn't apathetic to his children becoming vessels, as he commissioned a memorial to the Hollow Knight, and he obviously was shamed enough by his actions to seal the abyss. I mean, the reason why the Hollow Knight wasn't purely empty was because of a moment shared between them and their father. That moment tells me the Pale King didn't just treat the Hollow Knight as an object, even if he wanted to see them that way to spare him the grief. Silksong only confirms this. In the Red Memory, the White Lady expresses regret for what they did. Saying, "For our ways you will think us harsh, and so we must seem," tells me that she and the Pale King held regret and shame for what they did. This dialogue is very solemn, especially her last words, saying, "our sad fate." I know the White Lady can't really speak for the Pale King, but the usage of "our" at least lets me assume he felt the same way she does. In my eyes, the Pale King is a tragic character. A tragic, desperate fool who attempted the impossible, who tried to outlast the eternal march of time. Now let's turn our attention onto Grandmother Silk. This section is going to be longer than the Pale King's since I haven't made a video on her yet, and because her character is still relatively new. At first glance, this higher being seems like the victim. She appeared in Farloom and created the Citadel, basically just a religious government, and created her daughters, the Weavers, only for them to turn on her. Ever since then, she's been in slumber, desperately reaching out with her threads and snaring all she could in an attempt to wake herself. But when you look just a smidge deeper into her lore, it becomes very clear, very quickly, that Grandmother Silk, while a victim to the Weaver's trap, is certainly not to be sympathized with. And one need not look further than Farloom itself. Obviously, her haunting is very, very bad, on par with the Radiance's infection. Her threads ensnare the countless corpses strewn throughout the land, but they also take hold of still living pilgrims. But I'm also talking about the other nations and kingdoms that lived in Farloom before she moved in. Unlike the Pale King, who established deals and connections to the other nations around Hallownest, Grandmother Silk dominated. She wiped out the Choral kingdom through brute force, stifled the growth of shellwood, and created the citadel without a care for how it polluted what is now called Bylewater. And don't get me started on everything that happened with Verdania. Those lands were dying out due to her reign in the citadel, and when one of the princes went to attempt to make peace or some sort of deal, she killed him and stuffed his soul into 2 mechanical robots that would forever serve the citadel using a mockery of a dance that he used to perform with his lover. So yeah, compared to Grandmother Silk, the Pale King looks like a saint. Oh, that's not all. Her relationship with the Weavers wasn't good either. She created them, yes, but then she forced them into servitude, forever playing music to sustain her light. As for her relationship with her Silk daughters, Phantom and Lace, well, it's arguably worse. But here's where Grandmother Silk's character changes from a tyrannical beast to something more. She's still a tyrant, and a frightening one at that, but she is also very, very desperate to be a mother. Such a desire doesn't seem very apparent at first. It's not like she was very motherly to the Weavers, at least not from what we can tell, and she cast Phantom down to the exhaust organ for some unknown reason. Perhaps she didn't have this desire of motherhood at first. Perhaps she only wanted loyal servants who would forever worship her, like how the Weavers were forced to serve and sustain her. While I think that's true, at some point that desire grew to one of desperation, and I think it was spurred by the Weavers betraying her. Her daughters turned on her, so she decided to create daughters who wouldn't be able to. After defeating Lace for the 2nd time in the cradle, Hornet gets a silk heart, and we're given some dialogue from Grandmother Silk. During this, we hear things like, "Better a child spun mad than none. Better a child spun frail than none. Better a child spun pure than them." And at the end, "From our Silk, a child born loyal." This is talking about Lace, and the them are the Weavers. This proves the motivation behind Grandmother Silk creating Lace. She wanted a daughter who would never betray her, even if it cost that child their sanity and their strength. This isn't painting a very good image of Grandmother Silk, but there's one thing that changes all of this. In the game, at the end of Act 2, if Hornet sets the snare from the caretaker and activates it, she'll get caught by Grandmother Silk. Before she's dragged down into the void alongside the pale being, Lace intervenes. She cuts off her mother's arm and the two plunge into the void. From there, Act 3 begins. Once Hornet travels down to the abyss and speaks with this projection of Lace, it becomes apparent what's happening. Grandmother Silk is still alive, plunged deep into the sea of void, but she's not clinging to life for herself. She's doing everything in her power to save Lace, her daughter, even if it means destroying the entirety of Farloom. This really surprised me at first. You mean to tell me that Grandmother Silk, the god who thoughtlessly wiped out 4 other kingdoms, the god whose lack of care drove her daughters to turn on her, would sacrifice everything, including herself, just to save one Silk child? It doesn't make sense. I mean, if Grandmother Silk just broke free, she could make a new child anyway. Why is Lace so important? Well, it's not Lace specifically. I don't think Grandmother Silk cares for Lace, and Lace certainly doesn't care for her. No, Grandmother Silk only cares that she is her daughter. Lace even betrayed her, cut off her arm, yet she still fights for her sake. And that is because she is so desperate to be a mother. A mother who cares. A mother who fights and sacrifices for the sake of their child. This is only further proven after Hornet defeats Lost Lace. Once Lace is freed from the void, Hornet asks Grandmother Silk to give her power enough to ascend out of the Sea of Black, and the god obliges. She gives the last of her silk to Hornet, and we even see her die as Hornet's silk soars out of the cocoon. In doing so, Grandmother Silk doesn't redeem herself, but she solidifies herself as a mother. Or at least within the definition of mother that she believed in. Now that we've talked about the Pale King and Grandmother Silk separately, it's about time to compare them. Here's the really interesting stuff. When you put the stories of these 2 Pale Monarchs together, you immediately find some fascinating parallels. You also find just how utterly opposite they are. To put it simply, the Pale King sacrificed all of his children for the sake of his kingdom. Grandmother Silk sacrificed her entire kingdom for the sake of one child. Think about it. When the Radiants started to threaten Hollownest, the Pale King's solution was to change his children into vessels, effectively killing them. That couldn't have been his only option, right? But it's the only one we see him attempt. It was the only thing he was willing to do. When Grandmother Silk was consumed by the Void, she didn't care about Farloom at all, nor did she care only for herself. We see the state of Farloom during Act 3, and it's bad. The Citadel is practically in shambles. If Hornet hadn't intervened, Grandmother Silk would have kept thrashing and fighting until the entire place completely collapsed, all to save Lace. It's like what they say, a hero would sacrifice you to save the world. A villain would sacrifice the world to save you. But what's interesting here is that neither the Pale King or Grandmother Silk are shown as heroes. Neither are shown as being in the right. We're not told which option to choose from that old moral debate. In fact, both options are wrong. The Pale King's plan failed. His eternal city was corrupted and destroyed, and he was left to die alone, surrounded by nothing but his regrets. Grandmother Silk might have succeeded in keeping Lace alive in the Void, but it was really Hornet who saved her. The last act of giving the rest of her silk is hardly noteworthy either, as it ultimately fails. It's the Knight who ends up saving Hornet and Lace and who gets them out. Grandmother Silk ends up completely eradicated, her citadel in ruins, with no one willing to mourn her. So then, what's the answer here? When we're faced with calamity, what are we supposed to do? I think both games give us different answers which are reflected in how the games are structured. Here's where we get into some more cool parallels between these two games. In a broad sense, Hollow Knight is a game about descending. You start on the surface in Dirtmouth, and you descend deeper and deeper into the lands of Hallownest. In Silksong, you ascend. You start at the very bottom in Moss Grotto, and at the end, or at least at the end of Act 2, you climb to the very top of the Citadel. This structure of descending versus ascending tells me the narrative themes of these two games. Themes that are only solidified by the actual content of the games. Let's start with Hollow Knight. In this game, the kingdom you're exploring is already completely destroyed. It's already a graveyard, and the amount of living bugs you do find aren't a part of Hallownest at all. And frankly, the amount of living you do find is pitiful. Not to mention, the player character, the knight themselves, is arguably not even alive. And yet, the knight descends. The knight rediscovers their past by uncovering the abyss. From there, two options arise. To either replace the Hollow Knight in containing the Radiants, or to delve even deeper until they find a way to kill the Radiants instead. Both options lead to freeing Hallownest from the infection, but only one also allows revenge. Hollow Knight is a game about discovering the past, accepting it, and correcting an ancient wrong. It's a game about vengeance. Silksong, on the other hand, in this game, the kingdom isn't yet a graveyard. Unlike Hallownest, Farloom is still alive. Damaged, yes, and in the midst of great change, yes, but still alive. There are pilgrims at every step of the journey. There are several towns Hornet helps build up and restore. There are characters with their own dreams and aspirations that Hornet can help with. And once Hornet finally ascends to the Citadel, she's also given two options. One leads to replacement of Grandmother Silk, arguably the bad ending, whereas the other leads to freeing Farloom from Grandmother Silk, which obviously goes wrong and leads to everything with Act 3. But it's in Act 3 that we really see the narrative theme shine in this game. Hornet collects the hearts from the ancient kingdoms in Farloom, which is her discovering those pasts, and she also delves into her own past with the Red Memory sequence. But what's different here is the outcome. After all, Hornet is just as living as Farloom, unlike the Knight and Hallownest. Hornet isn't willing to sacrifice herself, nor is she willing to let Farloom fall to ruin. We know this from her dialogue with that projection of Lace, where she says, "I have already stood the sentinel for one dying land. That role I will never play again." And then later on when she says, "Oblivion may take you, child, but my own life I shall not sacrifice." Here's the major difference between the two games. Silksong is about leaving the past behind. It's about forging a new identity. And it's about the future. You could argue that the same could be said for Hallownest. There are still living characters in that game after all, but the Knight isn't concerned about the future. It's only concerned with correcting that ancient wrong and enacting its justice onto the Radiants. Hornet is concerned with the future, and I think that's beautifully reflected in the theme of ascending in Silksong versus the theme of descending in Hollow Knight. A bit of a side tangent there, but I think it fits in nicely with how the Pale King and Grandmother Silk are paralleled and contrasted. Team Cherry did such a satisfying job handling the narratives in these two games, especially with how Silksong builds upon the foundation of Hollow Knight. And that's all I have for this video. Shout out to my friend who inspired this video after we chatted about this for over 2 hours. If you enjoyed, consider subscribing, or maybe even checking out my Patreon. I've just barely posted a script that I scrapped about overanalyzing the weave nests in Silksong. There's some cool stuff in it, even though I ultimately didn't finish it. A huge thank you to all of my patrons as always. Love you guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye bye!